Alrighty. Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural episode of Aspiring Polymath. My name is Ethan Williams. Today I'm joined by Thomas Howes. Thomas Howes is a lecturer at Princeton University, an affiliate scholar at the Austrian Institute of Economics, and is currently co-writing a book with James Patterson called Why Postliberalism Failed for the Acton Institute. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Ethan.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk on Tom's upcoming book that he's publishing through Georgetown
No,
University Press.
sorry. I've got to make some update you on that actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no. That manuscript is in limbo right now because what happened was I only submitted it to about four academic publishers, and Georgetown was interested, so I submitted it to Georgetown. The editor at the time was Al Bertrand. And I received a revise and resubmit, which is normally a good thing nowadays in academic publishing. So I made substantial revisions. I turned one chapter into three chapters, another chapter into two. So that added, a 7 chapter book became a 10 chapter book. Substantially improved it. So I give credit to the reviewers that they did have some good advice. And then I went through the review process again, and we got the green light from both reviewers. One reviewer was less enthusiastic and thought I needed to expand the conclusion, but he still thought it should be published. The second reviewer is very enthusiastic, really excited about the book. Said he would share it with his students, and assign it for class. So everything was looking pretty good there. But unfortunately, around the same time, the editor I was working with passed away prematurely. It's a very sad situation. Um, that's the biggest tragedy of this whole thing, was that he passed away early. And the new editor had to gather all the materials from this and bring them to the publishing committee. And the publishing committee, and the editor I was working with, who passed away, was very excited about the project. He was happy about the project. And the publishing committee cited budget cuts and concerned that it wouldn't sell enough copies for not moving forward with it. So I spent it was over a year. It was that was about a year. It was off my desk. Only to hear that it was a tough setback.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But the thing is, now I have it. It's done. It's a completed manuscript. I've only sent it to about 5 total publishers so far.
Okay.
So I'm optimistic about where it's going, but it's still kind of in limbo right now.
Okay.
And I'm as a Christian, I have a strong sense that sort of that expression where one door closes, another opens. I feel like it's all going to work together for good in the end. So.
Yeah. Well, that's sad to hear, but I'm glad that it's hopefully will end up where it should end up. And
yeah.
Yeah.
But I can still talk about this manuscript because I'm proud of it. I've spent 5 years on it, and it's going to be published eventually.
That's exciting. That's great. So yeah, we'll even though the book is not on the timeline that I thought it was, we're still going to talk about some of the ideas from the book, and then also from a piece that you did for the journal that you help co-edit called The Vital Center, on general justice and public reason. And so we'll start off with your natural law and constitutional democracy book. So just for the audience, maybe we can start off with some quick definitions and some kind of framing to help us orient ourselves to the ideas, and then to the book as to the manuscript as you have it laid out right now. So real quickly, just what is natural law, what is constitutional democracy, and then how do you frame what you're doing with that manuscript?
Yeah, so I think the context in which this project came was as a response to I had my doctoral dissertation was on religious freedom, and when I was thinking about turning that into a book, I came to the conclusion that what I had was pretty effective at arguing for special attention to religious freedom if you already accept you're already in a secular democratic context. But I didn't have yet a strong response to people who opposed a sort of secular constitutional democratic context. Um, and part of that was seeing the debate between people who are more connected with new natural law theory and people like Kevin Vallier, who works from a public reason standpoint, forced me to delve deeper into the question of political philosophy that I felt I needed to engage with in order to make um, a argument for religious freedom, for constitutional democracy, that's grounded in natural law theory, but also presupposes philosophical uh, elements that are extraneous to natural law theory.
Mm.
That natural law theory doesn't come with its own political philosophy.
Mm.
You have to argue for even if you argue for a certain political philosophy with natural law arguments, you have to bring in other data, other insights that are more properly political, philosophical, or sometimes they might be economic, or sometimes they might be sociological, or any of these other fields that are relevant for political philosophy. Um, or institutional analysis or historical work, any of these things that may be relevant for political philosophy. I was dissatisfied with the approach that looked at it as if natural law came with all the answers.
Mm.
While still wanting to work with the natural law, I still embrace natural law theory, and I think that the political philosophy that includes natural law theory is best, but it doesn't answer all the questions by itself.
Yeah, that makes sense. What would you say is distinctive about your approach to this question of the relationship between natural law and constitutional democracy, besides what you said about not trying to deduce political institutions from natural law, but drawing from other sources? Is there
Well,
anything else that's distinctive about your approach, or is it
I would say the person who I was closest to on this, most influenced by, is Martin Ronheimer, who's a Swiss philosopher, and he actually started his first PhD was in political philosophy or it's only PhD. His PhD was actually in political philosophy under a somewhat famous political philosopher at the University of Zurich, and his name's eluding me right now. But he was considered a rival of Habermas,
hmm,
and and it was after he got his PhD and he published the book based on his PhD that he began to work closely with a German Thomist to develop his what became his habilitation thesis, which is like your second doctorate almost in Germany. So he went from political philosophy to Thomistic ethics for his habilitation thesis, and that was in the 1980s. But because of that, he's very good. He's also my favorite natural law scholar, followed by John Finnis, um, and Angel Rodriguez Luño. Um, but that gave him a unique perspective. He understood when he continued to have an interest in political philosophy. He taught political philosophy. He wrote articles and books on political philosophy. It gave him a unique perspective to understand some of the dilemmas and some of the issues that were being raised in political philosophy and in political theory. As you know, in the division of labor of the university, you have a political science department, you have a philosophy department, but within the political science department or the politics department, depending on the school, um, there's a thing called political theory, which it really is political philosophy. It tends to be done in a different way, but it is political philosophy. I mean, you political philosophy has its understood historically,
Hmm.
um, whereas there's a sort of cultural difference between the two, similar
Hmm.
to the difference between continental philosophy and analytic philosophy. There's a sort of culture difference. But a lot of times that's one area where the philosophers and political scientists overlap some more. They go to some of the same events. They sometimes they're engaged with each other more. Um, but yeah, so he was very familiar with those dynamics. It engaged with people like John Rawls in the public reason literature, Gerald Gauss. He was certainly familiar with all the discourse ethics and of Jürgen Habermas and all of them, and having had to engage with all of that. But his mode, his master's was in history, and his mode of doing political philosophy incorporated elements of history as well. His dissertation was a analysis how the German post-war left had some unfortunate commonalities with the pre-German war right, not the
Hmm.
Nazis, but if you know anything about that time period, uh, you know, one level below the Nazis and badness was this sort of these sort of German revolutionary conservatives who were more influenced by people like Mussolini than Hitler. Didn't have all the race stuff in there, but they still were radicals.
Yeah. Was
Um,
Carl Schmidt, was he
it
in
was
that?
really Carl Schmidt was I think that's really where Carl Schmidt was from.
Oh,
Was them. He joined the Nazi Party after everybody else did, um, and his friends. Actually, some of his the people that were associated with him were shot during the Night of the Long Knives.
wow.
And then Carl Schmidt defended the Night of the Long Knives and thereafter became a Nazi. But the Nazis themselves, I do not like Carl Schmidt really at all. But in his defense, the Nazis themselves never really trusted him after that because they thought he was actually one, wasn't really one of them.
Mm.
Still pretty bad, but there's 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 degrees of depravity, and there was still a significant gap between the Mussolini type radicals and the Hitler type radicals. Um, but yeah, but in some ways he's worse though because he just kind of cowered into that collaboration with them. Um, but yeah, so he was very familiar with that. Uh, his work has always Ronheimer's work has always involved a good deal of history in it. Um, and one of the things that this work on this manuscript and then this co-authored one with James Patterson has drawn me into history now, and I kind of like it because when I was in undergrad, my favorite classes were history and philosophy.
Hmm.
I would
Yeah.
just go to the history class and sit in the back, and it was like watching a movie. I
Mhm.
loved it.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to teach history. But now that, but through Ronheimer and through working with James, it's been fun to have sort of the flexibility of political theory, which is one of the advantages of political theory is you can incorporate history uh, a lot more. It's a lot more expected to incorporate history into your work than in political philosophy, which is unfortunate for political philosophy because history, I mean, there's a lot of insight from history that's relevant for coming to determinations about political philosophy. And it's not just the history of ideas, which is where a lot of philosophers go astray, including people like Patrick, political theorists as well, like Patrick Deneen, where they just bounce from idea to idea in the history of ideas, and they leave out what's going on underneath that with historically. That's kind of problematic. So that's been enlightening. So to the point then, yeah. So back to the manuscript. Um, that I think what I provide that's novel in relation to Ronheimer, who was kind of a lone duck. He was kind of a lone guy on this one. Um, is in these debates with the post-liberals, I had to delve back and read a bunch of historical thinkers that I hadn't spent as much time with before. And that filled in a lot of the gap with my understanding, because my formal education was in philosophy, but we did a lot of the history of philosophy where I studied. So I got tons of Plato, tons of Aristotle, Augustine, Aquinas, especially Aquinas. I've been studying Aquinas for 18 years now,
Wow.
and it's, but I'm one of those guys who studies Aquinas, who loves Aquinas but doesn't like Thomas.
Yeah.
Well, I like about 5 Thomas a lot, and then after that it drops precipitously. But it's um but that being said, I had to go back though and read a lot of these more intermediate figures. It was actually through a hint of Ronheimer that I started reading people like Quentin Skinner, and Quentin Skinner was very helpful to me. From Quentin Skinner, I started picking up some of the works of relevant works of people like Suarez and Richard Hooker, and then read Tyranny on his response to the claims about natural rights. Seems to me clear that Tyranny was right, although I do think they overrate this notion of subjective natural rights, because I think it was already there implicitly. But anyways,
Nicholas Wolterstorff has multiple chapters about that in his book on justice, arguing that the notion of rights comes out of the 12th century canon lawyers.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. At least the language of it, the language of subjective natural rights. That's right. I mean, there were Thomists before there. I at least can think of one Thomist who explicitly used that language affirmatively even before Occam. So the whole story of Occam thing doesn't really add up at all.
Yeah.
So
that's where the history piece comes in and is helpful, because sometimes these narratives about one thinker causing this cultural downfall through this idea of subjective natural rights or some sort of other idea like nominalism gets traced back and put on this one figure. But once you actually go and look at the history, you realize it's a lot more complicated than just drawing a straight line from Occam to, Locke or whoever you want to draw the line to.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I was very blessed in this part on this, because I also just happened to take 3 classes in grad school with the SCOTUS Timothy Noon at a Catholic University. Now he passed away recently, unfortunately, but he also knew Occam very well. He knew Scotus and he knew Occam very well. He also knew Bonaventure. He knew all those Franciscans from Italy.
Yep.
And I learned Occam really well with him. And it's not that I became an Occamist. I don't agree with Occam. I mean Occam is just whatever. But I also learned enough about him to realize that he's can't possibly have been responsible for whatever. I mean, even because it seems to me, I'm of the school of thought that what he means by conceptualism, I don't agree with it, but it's consistent with a doctrine of natural law, which he also affirms, doctrine of natural law. And what he means by voluntarism, or at least what he's associated with voluntarism at the theological level, what it means is also consistent with natural law, and it shouldn't have much effect on either ethics or politics. Whether there's some accidental relationship with what he says in that other stuff later on, that could be. There's an argument that the language of the theological voluntarists gets used by absolutist kings later on.
Yeah, it was Charles the First, right? In his speech to Parliament or whatever before he was executed.
That's right. So he uses that language of the ordained power versus the absolute power, and that's taken right out of the people like the moderns, the moderni, like Occam. Sure, but it's linguistic. But notice that's actually they use it to defend absolutism, not to defend modern constitutional democracy, which is the result of absolutism.
Right.
So
And
So
even someone like Tom Ward, who's a Scotus scholar at well, he's formerly at Baylor. I think now he's at University of Texas at Austin. But he even says like we pack a lot of content into the ordained versus absolute power distinction. But he's like minimally, what it just means is like God has the power to create a world, a cosmos, a system, and he has the power to act outside of the system. But
yeah,
the ordained that so absolutely speaking, he can act outside of the system, but
yeah,
ordinarily he works within the world that he made.
yeah, yeah. No, I think the distinction is perfectly legitimate.
Hmm.
Now, it's funny that where you get the disagreement, I'm not convinced. I think it's about where you draw the line. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, Occam or Scotus thought that God couldn't make it good for people not to love him.
Yes.
And I agree with that.
Hmm.
Now, I think you could say there are probably more moral principles that God could not make not the case for a rational creature, right? But it's not going to be the whole Ten Commandments. You
Hmm.
know, God could make a polygamous creature that's rational, that it's good for them to be polygamous. He could. I mean, I have seen no reason why he couldn't.
Yeah.
Right? I know it's not reasonable for us as humans to do it, but
Yeah.
I
Well,
there,
as especially if you think that the Ten Commandments are not a strict restatement of natural law, but they're a kind of like prudential application of natural law to the Israelite theocracy.
oh, that too. But I mean, I guess I'm inclined to think Ten Commandments for human beings mostly are natural law, except for
Mm.
like things like that are like that it's Sabbath is on Saturday, of course, is
Mhm.
conventional or whatever, and it's based on well conventional, but it's of divine law because God is whatever
Yeah, divine positive law,
divine
not
positive law,
yeah.
yeah. But that you have some kind of rest every week, and to do that or whatever, could you could say that's a natural law thing.
Mhm.
Um, but um, but certainly that if you had to think if you God created another world with other rational creatures that weren't human beings, that maybe the first few commandments are going to be the same, but then after that there could be some variation. And I think that's all Scotus is really getting at. I mean, it's just a matter where you draw the line. Now Occam goes even further with it. And he just
Right.
wants to say
He's
God
got the
could create.
famous question that everybody focuses on if God could command people to hate him, and he says yes, basically.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He thinks that, and the interesting thing about that is I disagree with Occam, but it's a matter of where you draw the line.
Hmm.
Um, and but Occam, it's funny, is really almost the more conservative, ultra conservative of that group, because when Aquinas wants to put the emphasis on God's our participation in the wisdom of God, that God's wisdom is eternal, that God cannot do anything that's actually wrong, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, now Aquinas is not going to have. He's going to basically agree with Scotus, but they draw the line somewhere different, and he's not even going to tell us where the line is because we don't really know.
Yeah.
um, but oh, I'm hearing my own voice on this here. Sorry.
Oh no,
Um,
you're fine. I'm not hearing anything, so I think you're
oh,
fine. But
okay. So um, but Aquinas was considered a radical with this because they thought the people of the 13th century, at least the Bishop of Paris and the Franciscans, thought that he was not recognizing enough of God's power,
mm,
that he was limiting God's power. And I'm with Aquinas on this, but it's funny that Aquinas was more the revolutionary thinker on this. And I
mm,
think that it is a more conservative, if you think about it in terms of time, in terms of like what most people's thought, Aquinas is more revolutionary thinker on this because, I mean, it seems to me most views of God that I don't know. I've never studied all the views of God from all the tribes in the world, but it seems to me that a more voluntaristic, capricious God is more common
mhm.
uh, and older than
Yeah.
this God who is limited by his own, sort of the nature of his own rationality. You know,
Yeah.
um,
I mean,
yeah,
the Greek pantheon was certainly not a paradigm of virtue.
yeah, exactly. So I think Aquinas is right, but I also think Occam is less revolutionary than he's more conservative in that sense.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't. But given how we actually were made in our okay, you got to be careful with the Occam. It's not our shared human nature, but we each have our own human nature that's maximally similar as regards the concept of humanity, with all the other people who have their what we call the concept of human nature. There's
Yeah.
no form that's common between them, but there are in their human what we call the concept of humanity. They are maximally similar in that regard.
Yep.
So therefore, we all have natural reason, and from that natural reason, we can determine what's right or wrong. And you have a doctrine of natural law.
Yep.
Honestly, like I just think Occam is. They just want to put. I mean, it's probably better than it used to be. You blame like groups of people for some large conspiracy about why things have gone wrong, and this is definitely an improvement from that. At the same time, like this is a sort of these just so stories of the history of ideas that you get in that are popular among Thomists these days. Even though Thomas Aquinas obviously didn't have any of these theories, they come after him.
Yeah.
But these just so stories, um, uh, I've been kind of an iconoclast. So part of the development of my thought was in sort of iconoclasm of just progressively doubting more and more of these stories.
Yeah.
Um, and that took me to I'd be debating with somebody about they'd bring up when I realized that Suarez and Hooker and those guys and all the Spanish scholastics had a doctrine of social contract. Um, I got really interested in it because it seemed to me pretty plausible as a doctrine of their doctrine of social contract, and everyone would be complaining about the social contract. And that's what you find in Deneen, right? It's in the
Mhm.
social contract of somebody like Hobbes that you get this sort of voluntarism about ethics. To think that ethics is just consent based, and
Mhm.
that's like an acid on the whole history of ideas leading to the Enlightenment and the American project, and from John Locke and then the founders all the way to John Dewey and John Rawls. And that's why everything's gone bad, and we've sort of created an anti-culture. Um, well, I mean, Hobbes is Hobbes was like one of many social contract thinkers. He wasn't the first, and he wasn't the best either. He's fun read. Everyone should read Hobbes
Yeah.
because he's it's. I mean, he's unique. It's a he makes some good points in there. He's a very conservative thinker. He's
Mhm.
more conservative than Locke. He's more conservative than the American founders because he's taking the
He's defending the absolutist monarchy on at least on one interpretation of him.
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
right. That's right. Yeah,
he's oh,
using the tools of the
sorry, you
parliamentarian.
froze on me for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, you're good. Sorry, what were you saying?
Using the tools of the parliamentarians and the Whigs, the side social contract. He's deforming social contract theory a little bit, and then using it to defend absolutism. So if you go to like
Yeah.
Filmer's like would basically agree with the result. He didn't like all the means he used to get there, but he agreed with the result because they both were defending sort of absolute monarchy. Um, but yeah, no, Hobbes didn't invent social contract theory. Maybe what's Hobbes. I don't know. You can maybe argue. I guess there were some Calvinists before him that had some sort of covenantal uh, theory that's similar to Hobbes. Um, but maybe if you could talk about the distinction between political contractarianism and moral contractarianism. The
Hmm.
Spanish scholastics were not moral contractarians; they were political contractarians, which was consistent. I mean, but at the same time, even Hobbes has a very reduced theory of natural law. It's very reductive. I'm
Right,
not
because
a fan of it.
he's essentially a materialist. I mean, he doesn't think that we can know things beyond, kind of atoms in motion. Um, I mean, he even goes so far as to call God a material object, right? Like if at one
Yeah,
point, yeah,
yeah. No, he's a materialist. There's some people think he's an atheist. I don't really care to get into that debate.
yeah,
Uh, but um, but yeah, no, but he doesn't represent social contract theory. The thing is that John Locke certainly read Hobbes. Early John Locke was a little bit more Hobbesian. He had a transition in his thinking and became he was more conservative when he was younger, and then he had a transition in his thinking, became more of a Whig, thinking that you needed the Parliament to put checks on the king.
Yeah. He cites Hooker all over the place
Oh yeah,
in
yeah.
Second Treatise. So
Yeah, by the time you get to the first and second treatise, as opposed to his earlier work, which was they're called the I'm blanking on it, but
is
he
it
had
the
early.
Essays on the Law of Nature?
No, there were the ones on government. He had a previous political work
Okay.
were closer to Hobbes, but in the first and second treatise, yeah, no, he's more of a Whig at that point. He's writing under a pseudonym because he wants to defend the right of revolution, and he wants to defend the primacy of Parliament over the king. But yeah, he's citing Hooker all over the place, which is also kind of ironic for this too, because Hooker was a very conservative thinker as well politically. He did not. He was very conservative about a right of revolution. He thought we needed to follow the leader basically. But he was also surrounded by a bunch of radicals, and he thought that they were going to do radical things, and he didn't want that.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, Hooker was when Hooker was studying theology, the Spanish scholastics were being read all over the place in the seminaries, and it's almost certain that he was reading them and engaging with the Spanish scholastics, and also people like uh, uh, Bellarmine. Um,
Mm.
and there's quite a bit of evidence to support that. Um, but back then you didn't cite them. You read Suarez, but you wouldn't cite them because you were living in England at the time, and Spain was your enemy, right?
Mm.
Um, Also, you don't want to cite Suarez because after he wrote now this was later. This was 30 years later than Hooker was writing, or a little bit later after. No, not 30 years, but it was a little bit after Hooker was writing. Hooker would have probably more likely not read Suarez, but he probably would have read uh, uh, Victoria,
Mm.
and some of the earlier ones. But when you get to like Suarez, when he writes, I'm blanking on. I it's been 2 years since I did a deep study of this stuff, so I'm like
Oh, no,
blanking
you're
on
fine.
names
That's
here. Oh yeah, his uh yeah, what's the last
Defense of
name of
the
this?
Catholic Church against.
Yeah, the defense of the Catholic faith. By the time he's writing that, then he's defending tyrannicide,
Hmm.
and so that's why his book gets banned in both, not just England, but it gets banned in France even because the
Yeah.
monarch they didn't want people revolting against the monarchy over there too, even though it was Catholic.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, and this was enlightening, because Suarez is sort of a prototypical integralist or integralist, depending on how you say the word,
Yeah.
because he believed that some kinds of civic penalties for acts against the faith was justified in a Catholic realm because not by the authority, the natural authority of the leader, but because uh, there's an indirect authority of the Pope, to which sort of legitimated using the civil arm to sort of to enforce ecclesiastical penalties. Um, yeah, yeah, I mean that was like, you know, but they would use that same argument to say that then England has no right to do this stuff because they're not a Catholic state anymore, and they're not
Mm.
haven't been given that authority indirectly from the Pope.
Yeah.
Um, so it's this
So
weird
So
sort of.
Suarez's social contract theory basically said that if a state isn't authorized by the Pope to uh, like promote the Catholic faith even through coercion, then the social contract kicks in and they can't they can't
Yeah, that'd be
enforce
right.
the.
That'd be right. It'd be a violation of natural rights, and there would be no natural authority on the part of the leader to have that, and nobody could give them that authority because they're not an authority in ecclesiastical matters.
Mm.
So So it's a very interesting thing that Suarez and Bellarmine and the Spanish scholastics, they're interesting because so many of them are um, sort of the advance our knowledge of things like economics. They're sort of the proto moderns when it comes to modern economics. They were sort of some of the key figures. They were social contract theorists and
Mm.
consent theorists, but they were also integralists, right? It's just weird. Uh, so it was in finding myself defending, and I read these book a really good book on Richard Hooker as well around that time, and I was reading several other books around that time, and I found myself defending the scholastic social contract theory to other Catholics, and trying to articulate what it was that was different about it than like Hobbes and these other later contract theories. Um, that I was able to from that develop a sort of a more grounded uh, a version of public reason that was sort of grounded in the insights of the scholastic social contract tradition that I thought was sort of complemented some of the handling of it that you got from people like Martin Ronheimer. Um, so that was key. So
Mm.
with the social to understand better the scholastic social contract thing, um, everybody there's a lot of disagreements among people about what it is, right? But my take on it is that for people like G.E.M. Amscom and a bunch of other people, even John Finnis or whatever, the assumption is that when you're dealing with asking the question of what justifies a political authority, that's the same thing as what justifies political obligation. Because for them, a political authority is the authority to create obligations for others. Um, I don't think that that was in the mind of the Spanish scholastics when they were trying to justify political authority with the social contract theory. For them, the problem was if we're all naturally equals, how is it that some of us can then have authority over one another? And it's like, well, we don't have natural authority over one another. Bob doesn't have natural authority over, maybe as parents we have natural authority over children, but outside of the family, you don't have any natural authority one over the other between adults. So how do you justify that this person, Bob, is making decisions for the whole community? And that's where consent theory comes in, is that political communities form to avoid the sort of inconveniences of a state of nature. That's just the reverse of saying for the sake of a common good. The common good is to do the things that are the inconveniences of a state of nature refer to those lackings of the common good. So
Mm.
the two things go together, right? But they sound very much like Hobbes at this point because they say like it's because things would be nasty, brutish, and short in the state of nature that political community comes together. But the political community coming together um, for the sake of that same common good, they need to, as a community, um, have some sort of leadership in order to make decisions for the common good, or else there will be no resolution to these things that need to be coordinated. Um, or they would just say for the sake, without somebody directed toward they just said without somebody to direct it to the common good. Um, that there would be problems. And later people like Finnis would say that that's a coordination problem that needs somebody to coordinate it. Okay, so for them it's to explain why this or that person or these or that laws are authoritative for the whole community, or why they are allowed to do that. And we see it when there's an absence of it, right? So Supreme Court justice is a civic authority, um, and Supreme Court justice, why are they allowed? What gives them authority to make decisions that affect the rest of the community? It's the community itself has sort of, over time, developed a sort of law and framework, whatever, for establishing authorities for itself. And it's not arbitrary, but it was, some resolution of the community itself. That's what they mean by communal consent to justify the authority. But like, if I'm a Supreme Court justice, I know my authority is not unlimited. I can do X, Y, and Z because that's within the the limits of my own authority, but I can't do these other things. Um, so if instead of doing their job to interpret what the law is, they make a new law. They do something that's outside of the scope of their authority. They say, I don't like the way this law is, so I'm just going to change it. That's a usurpation of authority. And now they're taking authority from the community that they didn't get. They're taking power from the community, even though they were not given that authority from the community. So that's what the Spanish scholastics are trying to make sense of. But it doesn't make sense to have that replace natural law, because it presupposes natural law insofar as we have natural duties to one another. We have a duty not to make decisions there's a matter of that's what I call a matter of general justice. General justice concerns those duties that we have to the whole community, right? And we have a duty to the whole community not to be making decisions for the whole community unless we're given some authority to do so, right? So usurping authority would be in violation of general justice. So the two things go hand in hand. They were hand in hand in the scholastics. They were even hand in hand in John Locke. He believes in natural rights and natural law as well. I think the one mistake that John Locke makes that I noticed when I read based on my reading, I like John Locke. I think he's underrated, and I think his stuff on property is if you properly understood, is very good. I pretty much like his whole first and second treatise. But one mistake I think he makes is he brings in this notion of tacit consent. And he says that, why are you obliged to do this? Well, because you made tacit consent by enjoying the benefits of society or benefits of the law. So then he isn't there. He shows he's not fully leaving. He's accepting a little bit too much, I think, of the Hobbesian view of social contract, and he doesn't need it because you don't. Because in the scholastic social, I do think he's reading people like Hooker in the scholastics as well. He's probably read Suarez, but he would not cite Suarez in the late 1600s in England, right? But I think he goes a little bit too far there, and then it's into more towards Hobbes and away from them. But you know what? It's such a minor thing. I don't think it really affects much, and I don't think that that's when you get to the social contract that everybody accepts at this point in the Anglophonic world. It wasn't really Hobbes. It was a more generic sense, and I think we still use the generic sense of social contract theory in our everyday language. That's basically that of the scholastics. It's like, well, why do you do this? Well, there's like sort of an implicit social contract that we do it like this. We kind of have agreed to do it this way. If you analyze it, break it down, you get to these hard questions like, well, what is the consent there?
Yeah, because I mean that's someone like Michael Huemer in his problem of political authority is going to say, well, no one ever actually consented in history. Like that's just not how governments ever arose, was through actual consent.
I read that whole literature of like the modern literature on individual consent, and basically this scholastic social contract theory just bypasses it. It has nothing to do with individual consent. It has to do with what it's an analogy. It's a corporate consent. It's that the community worked this out in a way that was, passably fair. That makes it so that it's not just completely arbitrary that Bob has this thing. Like he got it from a communal process that legitimated it. Does that involve some individual consent? Yeah, but it's not going to be everywhere. Not everyone's going to consent to it. But it's enough for it to emerge that me as an individual, I can't complain about it. I mean, like, okay, well, I mean, this thing emerged organically, and the community itself as a whole was, plausibly involved enough in it that it stands out. And plus, we need this thing to get done anyways. So the way that it did handle it has more authority, has more reason, count for, gives enough of a rationale for this person Bob doing, doing this thing.
Yeah. Two quick follow-up questions to that.
So I prefer to call it corporate consent, and I
Yeah.
understand it's an analogous
Mm,
notion. There's not,
yeah.
the idea of like a corporate actual consent of a corporate entity gets kind of fuzzy.
Hmm.
It should not be viewed literally as the same thing as individual consent.
Right.
But I think we all know that. I think we all have a sort of sense of that, and that's why I think it's you can't remove the notion of a a contract as an analogy, a social contract as an analogy, with consent as an analogy, as something emerging within a communal setting. We all have a sense of what that is, but I think we go astray and run into the problems of people like Michael Huemer and these other people if we think of it in the line of individual consent. And I think that's where Locke kind of he gives too much to the individual consent thing that I think creates that false problem, I guess you could
Gotcha.
say.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to say, how do you respond to people that would argue that that argument from analogy isn't sufficient to ground the consent argument that's needed to justify political authority? And then the second question would be, you talked a lot about how the state of nature is kind of the corollary of the common good, in that it's the lack of what's needed. And
Yeah.
so the authority is given through consent in order to remedy those lacks and achieve a kind of common good that involves coordination. Someone like Michael Pakalik would argue that that's not sufficient because it makes the common good just instrumental and not intrinsic. That's his, I think
No,
that's his argument against John Finnis is,
yeah, but I disagree with that because, and John Finnis actually doesn't hold that as just instrumental. He
okay.
changed it. His position evolved on that. Um, what it is the problem is that happens is some elements of the common good are intrinsic and some are instrumental by themselves, but they all become not just instrumental insofar as they are common. Like for instance, uh, uh, having a bunch of money, a resource, having a good financial system
Hmm.
isn't an intrinsic good, um, but uh, but it is instrumentally very good, right?
Hmm.
So you could say to have that is a common good, right? But in so now that you have it as a common good, working for it becomes intrinsically good because it's common with it's relational. It affects our relationship with the other people that we share the common good with. So it becomes intrinsically good insofar as it's common
Yeah.
because it gets sort of warped into the relationship that we have with the community, right?
Yeah. And because
But
those relationships are intrinsically valuable, we
yeah,
want to preserve the instrumental things that help preserve those
that's right.
relationships.
That's
Right.
right. So even you might say that I'm giving my wife, when I get her a gift card to go get clothes, I'm only giving her an instrumental good. But the gift itself is intrinsically good because it
Mm.
affects our relationship. It's an act of love for our relationship. Similar thing with instrumental goods that are part of the common good become intrinsic goods insofar as they're common.
Mm.
And that's kind of that's how I understand Finnis's evolved version of understanding of it. And I think in his evolved form, I basically agree with that. And I think that's basically what Maritain held as well.
Mm.
Um, Back to the thing about the consent theory, it's just a matter of what you say consent's actually supporting.
Okay.
On the scholastic view, it's not doing all the work that they're trying to do it in consent theory and analytical philosophy. No, it's just trying to say why Bob here is allowed to make these decisions instead of Joe, and
Okay.
why Bob is allowed to say make these specific list of decisions and not this list of decisions instead of Joe. Like why the Supreme Court Justice Bob here in the United States has this authority, and the Supreme Court, the court leader in France has a different one. It's because that's the one that emerges from the community in its through its plausibly uh, reciprocal process, which is always going to involve a bunch of injustices. But to Bob, that doesn't matter because at least Bob has deniability or he has like rationale to say that the community has given him this authority, right? There might be some dispute there, but that's within not Bob's not not culpable for that. He's not committing an injustice to the community by following the rules as they're commonly understood, right? So it emerges in the same way like the meaning of words and language and everything emerges too. So on that sense, it's not in opposition to the people who are like Hume or what's his name? Who's the guy who also writes about conventions and uh, what's that guy's name?
Smith?
Uh, More recent in the 1960s. It's the same guy who's famous for Possible Worlds.
Oh, Saul Kripke.
No, the other one.
Uh,
He actually thinks possible worlds are real.
oh, David Lewis.
David Lewis
Yeah.
writes some stuff on conventions and on customs and stuff like that, where how they emerge, you know.
Okay.
And the thing is, it's like the scholastic view of social contracts is not opposed to that because it's in its conventional nature as something that emerges within the community. That's what we're really getting at when we talk about communal as a sort of social contract that's communal consent, right? Um, there was actually there was a critique of Hume from the 70s. I can't remember the name of the article. Said something similar. It's like Hume's argument doesn't refute that aspect of social contract theory. If you're two sides of the boat and you just both start paddling because you need to, right? That kind of emergence within the community is itself what we mean by sort of the communal consent and the social contract that itself emerges from that.
So the social contract in the scholastic tradition is attempting to explain a particular situation, why
Yeah,
Bob has authority over the community. It's not seeking to give a general
why
count of
you would
political authority
have
as
the
such.
possibility of authority in the first place, which is more a natural law thing. It's like saying
Okay.
that we are not isolated individuals. We are communal by nature. We do have natural goods that we recognize as good, which affect our practical reasoning. And we also have common goods that we recognize by nature. And we also have depending on your political philosophy, that's where your political philosophy comes in. The common sense political philosophy is we need this uh, uh, sort of coordinated effort to that involve to achieve these goals or whatever. So and that's why So I think then the people who say the anarchists the anarchists who say that it's intrinsically wrong to have coercive state power, I disagree with them completely, right? But you could be an anarchist, and I'm not one of them either. But you could be an anarchist who says state power is only justified if it's necessary to achieve these common goods, right? But if you can do it without the state power, then it becomes immoral because then you're enforcing this sort of coercive apparatus unnecessarily or without good reason,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I think that's the more reasonable version of anarchism, right? I still don't agree with it because I haven't been convinced by them that you could actually get something, that's relatively as effective at achieving the common good without the use of state coercion. So
Well, to
I'm
some degree, we would have to think that that's right, right? Because the uh, new heavens and the new earth, it talks about us co-reigning with Christ and it uses language of kingdom, but surely there's not going to be any coercion in the beatification, right?
well,
Like,
yeah, but that's a redeemed nature. I'm saying that a fallen state of nature or
oh,
whatever that
gotcha,
I believe that coercion is going to be necessary, but
gotcha.
but then you would just have law in its directive aspect if you had like a sort of you know redeemed state, a new heaven, a new earth situation. Um, but in this fallen world, I'm not convinced. But I still think I think it's a more reasonable version. But but although I but if that were to happen, say they discovered a way to do it and it works just as well or better than using state coercion or whatever, then I would have to abandon state coercion. I'd agree with them. I'd have to abandon it because I don't. My rationale has gone away, right?
Hmm.
Is it? But
Yeah.
but I don't think we're there yet. The examples they give of like medieval Iceland or whatever don't really convince me. Because also like that there's this issue of that we have that the greater power that's social power that's available now than 800 years ago, um, it's not going away. It's there. What like modern constitutionalism does is it separates it and directs it and maintain. You know what I mean? And holds it at bay. It holds it in check. But it's not going away. So
Yeah.
there's a Brad Lewis has a comment where he says the only thing worse than the modern state is modern statelessness. So you need a in order to have with modern power, you need a state. But then the state unchecked is the most dangerous thing of all. So modern constitutionalism checks the state, and now there's a sort of equilibrium of so that we can have a functioning civil society and all of that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Um,
What would
but
you?
oh, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, no. I was just going to ask, like, so since natural law grounds the social contract, and then the social contract grounds particular political authority,
Yeah.
what role does public reason play for you? And then also, what's the main difference between your version of public reason and someone like Kevin or someone like Gauss or someone like Rawls?
Well, I just wouldn't deny natural law.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know Kevin doesn't deny natural law, but in his politics, he tries to avoid it. Because you're dealing with um, sort of evolved social norms and all of that. Although I accept evolved social norms as so basically, I just don't get rid of natural law. I
Mm.
basically I think there's a lot of what they're saying is accurate, um, but I think I think, and Ronheimer said something similar. He said, um, uh, there is some truth to that about reciprocity as a ideal in our because we're working together in a political community and we're working together with people that disagree, and a lot of that disagreement is, for all we know, unculpable. We can't know for sure that there's some culpability in this disagreement. So there's real inculpable disagreement with the other people we share a community with. So we owe it to other people when we try to justify the use of state coercion, that we justify it in terms of some principle that's common, that we could have in common. And I'd say like common goods generally serve that function. If you appeal to the common things that are considered common political goods, and I think there are also social norms that will affect how well we do that, how the way we do that as well, that it will also emerge and have some sort of force. Uh, for example, you go to Romania, the norms for getting in queue or whatever you say, getting in the line are different than
Yeah.
the norms in the United States. Then what's important, you have some common agreement and you go follow it. You don't put yourself above everybody else,
Hmm.
right? Um, that's a social norm. It has some. It's not absolute, but it has some moral force. Similar, that's what laws are. They don't have absolute force, but they have some moral force, right? They have a significant amount. They could have been differently, but they are these laws here, and now we owe it to everyone in our community to give the strong presumption to them. Um, uh, you know, um, but those aren't the only norms that are emerge. I would say in the United States, given our past, that we've shared this country with a bunch of people of different faiths, while it might have been justifiable to have even to this day to still have a soft establishment, a toothless establishment in England, because their history, was it goes back far enough where they had an Anglican establishment. I think there's some justification for that for them, that they're being fair to each other by still allowing that. But I think it would go against the sort of implicit social contract of the U.S. to even change our constitution to allow for that. I think even to change our constitution to allow for that, I think would be sort of disrespectful to the other religious groups, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so I do think that. And because unless there was some very good reason, I don't think there is. I actually think that the case for religious establishments is actually very weak if you look at the empirical data, especially if you're religious. Um,
Hmm.
it tends to hurt the established church more than anyone else.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, the Church of England is largely empty. I mean, I
yeah,
don't know. It's not thriving at all. I mean,
yeah. European establishments are notoriously not thriving, and I think Stark and Fig make a good reason wise because then they, they they're taking out. It's like a company that doesn't have to compete anymore.
yes.
you know. And also, like when people see it as something that's official and imposed on them, then it becomes something less intrinsic to them that they've actually chosen.
Yeah,
So
they
then,
resent as the minority who's receiving the negative effects of not being a part of the state church. They resent it, and so when they
yeah,
get power, the religion of the previous regime tends to fade along with that regime, right?
yeah, that's right. And I think so. Going back to your last question, though, I think Ronheimer brings this up, and he was in his critique of Rawls, and he said, uh, where Rawls goes wrong. Well, first of all, he has a hypothetical social contract because it's constructivism, right? It's trying to
Mm,
get around the issue of natural law by some sort of construction. It's more an exercise of poetic reasoning and not a praxis, right? Because you
mhm,
know that distinction in Aristotle between poiesis and praxis, poiesis and making,
mhm.
praxis is doing,
Yep.
right? Practical reason that we're dealing with prudence is a type of praxis that's doing primarily, whereas poetic reason is something different. Well, for Kant and for Rawls, Rawls is a kind of Kantian. What's central in practical reasoning is poetic reasoning, that you
Mm,
construct something, right? You construct a system,
mhm.
and a system that everyone can agree on, right? I don't think you need that foundation. I think it's actually you might be able to. It might be functional. So you could have a society where people were working with the Rawlsian framework and they come to conclusions that are okay. Um, but it's not going to get at the real rationale between why things really are right and why they really are wrong. You're just going to have a purely um, you're basically you're creating a model on top of reality that might come to the same conclusions as you would if you were, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
model of reason on top of actual reasoning. And
Mhm.
so, like, it might come to the same conclusions as good, sound actual reasoning, but it won't give you the rationales. It's like an algorithm that just gets you there, but you don't know why,
Yeah.
right? There's disadvantages to that, and it's an unnecessary problem because we do have natural reason.
Mhm.
People do have natural reason. We can appeal to natural reason. But there are limits to in our appeal to natural reason. We have to deal with the fact that there's still disagreement, despite the fact that we have all natural reason. And a lot of that disagreement doesn't come down to natural law disagreement. It comes down, some of it does, but some of it comes down to a political philosophy disagreement or an economic disagreement or all these other two. So, so, uh, so I guess, but in practice, though, you say, well, you appeal to common goods to justify, whatever. Um, there are certain means towards those common goods that maybe used to be plausible as serving those common goods, but are no longer plausible. And I think a lot of the previous justifications for against religious freedom or towards religious regulation have gone away because they're no longer plausible. For instance, the early John Locke thought you couldn't have religious freedom because you would lose without the unity of ecclesial unity. You would lose the civic peace and unity of the whatever. But then he traveled and saw in Germany these instances of these different denominations getting along with each other in society.
Mhm.
So he abandoned that idea. And I think most of us have abandoned that idea. We can have civic unity without having ecclesiastical unity, right? In
Yeah.
fact, empirically, it's been shown like to get rid of religious freedom actually creates more disunity, right? Yeah, like you create more war and more other things. So it's
Yeah.
no longer a plausible rationale. And the other rationales for it are kind of implausible now at this point. So
Yeah.
so I account for that. But what Ronheimer really says about Rawls is when you go back to this sort of even in his hypothetical state of nature, uh, we're free and equal, right? Before and then we go over the veil of ignorance, right? Um, but what the free and equal part is, it's a very thin notion of what we are as free and equal, right?
Mm.
For Ronheimer, we are free and equal, but we're free and equal with natural reason.
Mm.
Um, so some of the relativism in the notion of free and equal, right, of Rawls is a little bit implausible.
Mhm.
That many of the sort of common sense notions about family life may be controversial in academia, amongst a bunch of nerds in academia. But if you go to most of society, like people, they get married, they have kids, they
Yeah.
realize it's probably not a good idea to marry 5 people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
It's what philosophers call knowledge by acquaintance, right? Like
Yeah, knowledge by
it
acquaintance,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
At our practical level, even a lot of the people who say that they're all radical theoretically, in their actual practice, they behave like conservatives, you
Mm.
know? There's actually quite a bit more consensus there than Rawls wants to pretend. So Rawls famously says, we need, the government needs people to reproduce, basically, so it has some civic relevance. But whether who they if they re, if, whether they have one partner or 5 doesn't matter, right? He says it's some sort of
Sorry,
like
I froze again.
there's some note in Rawls. I've got to find it where he says, it doesn't matter whether you have one spouse or 5. That's irrelevant to me,
Oh,
right? And so I critique that in my book manuscript, that there's quite a significant civic argument for enforcing monogamy in the relationships. I don't know if you've read this recent book, The Weirdest People in the World,
I've heard of it, but I
with
haven't read
with
it.
Joe Henrich. Oh,
Hmm.
he shows how important it was that, like, the church in the Middle Ages banned polygamy.
Yeah.
One of the things he says, banning cousin marriage was really important too, but also banning polygamy. One of the
Yeah.
problems you get whenever you allow polygamy, you can guess one thing that happens. A bunch of what happens is a few men, a certain small portion of the population, have many wives,
Yep.
right? Um, and it doesn't, in a normal polygamous society, you're going to have like a 40% substratum of men who have no mates. And men with no mates have higher T levels. And they are disgruntled and they get into trouble and they get into crime and they get into. So it creates a bad situation for everyone else, because all these having this half the population without some sort of mate, actually, and these aren't like religious celibates here. It actually creates a chaotic situation for everyone, right?
Mhm.
So it was very good for civilization and society, that taboos against polygamy formed, and also even laws against polygamy formed, so that you have a more stable society. It's crazy how we take it for granted, but in the past, uh, it was like only 40% of males passed on their genetics, and 80% of females.
Whoa.
Yeah, but now it's like closer to even, right?
Mhm.
So we're living in utopia compared to the past, and enforced monogamy was a big part of that.
Yeah.
So Rawls is just wrong that that doesn't have civic relevance. So that's the sort of extreme um, sort of neutrality that I think Rawls goes too far with.
Yeah. So you disagree with Rawls, and I think this will probably be my last question, and then I'll have to go. But so you disagree with Rawls, but then also, like, maybe to play devil's advocate for the post-liberals a bit, like we we grasp these common goods, and these common goods kind of help us commonsensically navigate how, like, what we along with, like public reason and the social contract, they help us navigate how we order our political lives.
Yeah.
What happens when you have a society that starts losing, that stops, like, sharing these? Sorry, I keep freezing. I don't know what's going on. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Basically, like, to play devil's advocate for the post-liberals, like, what happens when you start losing common goods, in the sense that people stop recognizing them as valuable and stop sharing them? So
Well, I mean,
when marriage breaks down, or uh, when people don't recognize biological sex, or point to any of the kind of more like flashpoint topics in our culture, like
yeah.
the people that think that, basically, the post liberals that think that we have to have a homogeneity of the good in order to have a flourishing society. What would you say to them, since you also kind of ground some of these things in common goods? what happens when people stop sharing those goods?
Well, their political philosophy is all wrong. That's one thing. It's like the means to the end. Their understanding of that is all wrong. And a lot of you notice that none of these post-liberals do a lot of empirical work, unlike how other societies have functioned. So, I mean, the idea that you can go back into get the put the genie back in the bottle for like pluralism in general, like religious pluralism, all these other things, is they're still operating just like the 19th century reactionaries were operating and the early 20th centuries were operating under this nostalgic view of a past that never was. And even the like level of homogenization that you could find like in the 13th century in Europe is completely unattainable to us now, unless we want to reverse all the other stuff, which is impossible. We have more, so we have greater technology, we have greater mass communication, we have greater capacity for social organization, which are going to be there no matter what state you have, right? So you are going to have, but you, in response to it, you are going to have a bigger, stronger state. You didn't have these sort of large jurisdictional states that you had. That they started forming like the 1300s and 1400s and developed into the modern period. Some of it was mimicking the way that the church was in its own internal government, like bishoprics and all of this. Um, they started mimicking the bureaucracy of the church or whatever, and they started forming the larger territorial states with their bureaucracies. The capacity for tyranny too now is higher than it's ever been too, because you have this large states. What modern constitutional democracy did was take that and then make it civilized by limiting it, right, and separating the power. What the reactionaries of the 19th, 20th centuries were hoping was we could just go back to that golden age, right? We can go back to that golden age back when we had before back when we had the throne and altar. And it really, throne and altar was a modern state thing. Before that, the real golden age was like the 1300s when you had the sort of integralist model of like the state is subordinate to the church and all of that, which never worked perfectly, but at least it was plausibly within some kind of semblance of it back then. Became impossible as the state grew larger. Then the state started trying to control the church. Notice that even in these Baroque kingdoms, like Catholic kingdoms, the monarch is always constantly trying to control the church as much as possible. You get things like Gallicanism. You get things like the fact that all these Catholic monarchs had veto power on who the Pope chose for bishops. They were trying to control the church, and they were doing a better job of it, right? Because they had the power. They had the physical power. They could jail your bishop, right?
Yeah.
So but what happens though, if you disregard this change in like social change that's happened, and the fact that we went from a world in which 10 to 15, tops 20% of the country was literate, to a world in which 98% is literate, and you have mass communication and free press, and you have a printing press, so it's cheaper to share information. You know, not just have printing press, then you have computers and you have all this other stuff. Yep. Trying to go back to the sort of level of cultural homogeneity of before without starting an Amish community, something like an Amish community is just impossible, right? So the only way to do it is through sheer force, right? And all the people who tried to do it through sheer force, that's when we get like the fascist governments of the early 20th century. And you have to be a complete ideologue to think that those governments were serving common goods as we recognize by natural reason better than like the United States is doing, right? So yes, we have issues and we have a real threat now of devolving into one of those governments. But the solution is not to step on the gas and go towards those governments. It's to fix the stuff that's causing this problem, right? And I think some of it is social and religious. That the sort of ethic and family life ethic and things like that. People's screen addictions and their other addictions, all that sort of stuff. This is very bad for free society. But and you could, I think you could use some sort of state power to address it, like for instance, not allowing phones in schools, having more school choice so people can send their kids to religious schools as opposed to so all these, there are things that you can do to address it. using state power, but you don't have to be a post-liberal to accept that. That stuff's all within the realm of traditional constitutional democracy.
Hmm.
So I don't know why post-liberals want to step on the gas towards, you know, the bad stuff, because
Yeah.
there's no way that Franco's Spain was serving the common good better than the United States is now.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds it's I mean I'm yeah, trying to play devil's advocate for them, but then also just knowing the history, it's just uh, it it really is hard to see how anybody could reasonably think that those regimes were better.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, like, and I think this is the biggest takeaway I've had, like, since meeting you and since talking with you about your work, is just realizing that, like, yes, a lot of these religious figures and post-liberals are correct in thinking that there is a problem with where our society is at and a loss of some of these common goods and some of these, these issues with family and all these other things. But the solution is not to do Franco or,
yeah,
Carl Schmitt. Like, the solution is just to, like, take some common sense reforms and
yeah,
measures and
yeah,
and try to start getting the next generation on a healthier track. Like,
yeah, yeah.
it's it
No,
doesn't
people.
require it doesn't require a complete upheaval of the foundation of your society to fix the problems that we're experiencing.
Yeah, it's exactly it, and it actually is counterproductive, right? Then you create all these enemies, and people associate the church with your aggressive, violent politics. Out in Spain now, 13% of the population goes to church. In the United, that would be the second lowest number in the United States of all the 50 states.
Wow.
U.S. is a very religious country, and freedom has been a big part of allowing that to happen.